Midnight on Earth podcast with your host, Jake Weaver. Engineered by Cedric Swan.
Hey out there, we're back with another episode of Midnight on Earth. I'm your host, Jake Weaver, and we're here to bring you more knowledge, more lights, and more love. We're going to have an incredible episode today. Today, we're going to be delving into the history of psychedelia and listening to two different lectures from one of the icons, the pioneers of psychedelia, Timothy Leary, somebody I know I would love to have on the show. But alas, he has left this dimension and he's not here. So we're going to learn what he has to say. And we have with us Brynn Anderson in the studio. She's going to listen with us of Vital Force Herbs. She's going to listen with us as we learn from Timothy Leary. But first, I need you to do something for me. Follow me on Instagram. If you haven't done it already, so many people have, but so many people haven't because there's 10 billion people on the planet, and I don't have that many followers on Instagram. So I guess I have to keep telling people, follow me on Instagram at midnight_on_earth. That's the address. Spotify, of course. Follow us there if you haven't already. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you go to get your podcasts, follow us. I really appreciate it. And of course, please tell a friend, a family member, people you know that like podcasts. Tell them about this podcast because it's fun, it's enlightening, and it gets better every episode. And it's developing as we speak. Things are happening. How this movement, this community, this podcast develops, it's all happening before your eyes. You're witnessing it. You get to be a part of it. And so could they. So please tell a friend, midnightonearth.com. And now we talk about Timothy Leary, but I just want to say hello to Brynn Anderson. How are you doing today, Brynn?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me today. This will be fun.
Thank you for joining us again in the studio. We're going to listen to this very rare lecture from 1964, and then we're going to listen to a lecture from 1992. Both lectures are kind of at certain points in Timothy Leary's life. One being, of course, towards his rise to international popularity, and then in 1992, close to 4 years before he left this dimension, left his body. So it's kind of cool to have that juxtaposition, to see that polarity of the different points in this person's life, this figure that influenced so many people. And he's done so much. I've read a lot of his books. I've watched tons of his videos over the years and listened to lectures like the ones we're going to listen to today. And he's an amazing mind. He definitely left his mark on this planet. I mean, everyone pretty much knows who he is and what he's associated with. And I think that's pretty profound. And of course, his partner in love, I'm not even going to say partner in crime, his partner in love and helping to manifest the psychedelic renaissance of the 60s was, of course, Richard Alpert, a.k.a. Ram Dass. He was his partner at Harvard when the LSD explosion took off, and there was so much of that going on. So first, let me just get his bio here. Timothy Leary was a psychologist, Harvard professor, countercultural figure in the 1960s who gained fame through his promotion of psychedelic drugs as tools for the expansion of consciousness. After becoming embroiled in legal battles and serving prison time in the 70s, Leary became a lecturer and futurist in later life, becoming interested in human life extension and things like computers, advanced technology, and space colonization. He passed away of prostate cancer in 1996, unfortunately. He probably had a lot more life had prostate cancer had not affected him. However, everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. So who am I to say what's what? But what do you think about that, Brynn? Timothy Leary.
Yeah, I think it's cool that you found an early lecture and a late lecture. It'll be cool to see.
Yeah, and we'll talk. Sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay.
I was going to say, we'll talk in the middle. We'll listen to the first one, and then we'll talk about the things that he said, and then we'll go into the next one. Both super humorous, both super funny. We've got a lot more interview episodes coming up. I felt it was a good idea to do one more, hang out with Jake, hang out with his friend Brynn. We're sitting down, we're talking, we're getting to know each other, we're learning together. We do one more of these episodes. We'll get on to some more interviews after this. We got a great lineup coming up. So here we go. This is from 1964 at the Cooper Union in New York City. And the lecture is called How to Use Your Head. So this is Timothy Leary. And we're just going to fade in as they're introducing him, and then they bring him out on stage after the applause. So here we go. Timothy Leary, How to Use Your Head.
He is author of Psychedelic Experience and also 27 essays and articles on psychedelic drugs. And frankly, as Director of Adult Education, I'm very happy to welcome Mr. Timothy Leary to the Cooper Union Forum, speaking on hallucinogenic drugs or how to use your head. Mr. Leary.
Woo! Woo! Leary! Leary, 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 Leary.
This lecture on how to use your head could be summed up in one sentence. You have to go out of your mind to use your head. Now, with that, I should go home, but there's a 58-minute radio tape that has to be filled, so I'll go on for a little more time. My aim tonight is to try to present the most important message you've ever heard. Now, this aim, quixotic as it may seem, is to change your view of man and maybe your view of yourself. I know it sounds grandiose, but this aim is not, because it's nothing new. We're going to be talking about the oldest problem, the oldest mystery which man has faced, and what I'm going to say, again, is the oldest message in human history. Now, this lecture could be given in hundreds of metaphorical, literary, philosophic, scientific languages. I'm going to try tonight, though, to present this story in terms of a mystery novel, a detective story, because I think that it's the greatest scientific, philosophic mystery story in history. And it all has to do with an incredible robbery, the greatest confidence game in history, the greatest loss of treasure that we can conceive of, the most successful cosmic swindle, and the victims you and I don't even know we've been robbed, or maybe have only the dimmest suspicion that something has happened to us. Let me describe the incredible nature of the crime. At birth, the human being is presented with an extraordinarily valuable gift, an instrument magical and intricate and powerful beyond belief, a camera with literally billions of lenses. I'm talking, of course, about the human brain. Neurologists tell us that the brain contains between 10 and 13 billion nerve cells. Now, of course, that's a ridiculous statistic. The human mind just can't grapple with the concept 10 billion. But to make matters worse, neurologists tell us that any one brain cell can be hooked up with as many as 25,000 other cells. So that what you're dealing with is a matrix, a network, a computer, the number of associations of which, again, are stupendous. We're told that the number of possible associations in the human brain at any 1 second is larger than the number of atoms in the universe. Neurologists tell us that the human brain fires off about 5,000 million signals a second. There's a tremendous amount of activity going on in the 7 inches behind our forehead. There's a tremendous amount of information and a tremendous amount of awareness going on there. Your brain is aware of several thousand activities going on in your kidney at every 1 second. It's aware of what's going on in your liver. It's processing the most incredible kinds of chemical information, pH content, blood levels, sugar levels, oxygen, CO2. Your brain is aware of this enormous amount of information. But we, that is, I, Timothy Leary, and each one of you is cut off, of course, from awareness of most of these processes. Now, the gap between what the mind is aware of and the limits of consciousness within our head is the robbery that I mentioned before. Almost every culture and every religion has some way of explaining how we lost this. And most cultures and most religions have some theories as to how to get it back. The Christian theology tells us that we lost it because of the sins of our forefathers. Eastern philosophies tell us that it's there inside and we can get it back, and that most of the things we see going on outside are Maya, or processes that tend to pull us in to external awareness and preventing us from enjoying and understanding this fantastic kaleidoscopic series of activities within. And almost every religion has produced a method for expanding consciousness or for recapturing what we've lost. According to the monotheistic religions, the Judeo-Christian and Islamic theories, there's a judge up there that will give it back to us if we follow his book and do what his lawyers tell us to do. Eastern religions and Eastern psychologies have, of course, a wide variety of methods for expanding consciousness, for getting back the potentials which we've lost. and even most primitive cultures have developed some sort of myths, heroic sagas, which suggest how man has tried to recover the lost treasure. Now, in taking this eccentric position of taking the brain seriously, you run the risk of getting out of touch with your professional colleagues. But there are some comforts because you're admitted to another club, which is one of the oldest scientific and philosophic associations in history, which has been going on for centuries and for thousands of years. The long line of people who've had some suspicion that there's a lot more than we've been led to believe. Now, the present time is a very exciting time for the members of this club because there have been three developments very recently in science which have suggested new metaphors, new ways of explaining this mystery, and new methods for rediscovering the lost treasure. These three developments are, first, the recent findings about the genetic code. Second, and more important for us who are alive today, the research on the process of imprinting, which is the way the nervous system is structured early in the life of any species. And third, the development of the psychedelic drugs. I want to talk about the genetic code and its implications for the expansion of consciousness. We're focusing here on the question, why did we lose access to all this consciousness which resides within, and who did it? And I'm going to suggest for metaphorical purposes that it's the genetic code which has so designed the nervous system as to rob man temporarily of access to his own head. Now, of course, the first thing you have to do in cracking a mystery is to put yourself in the place of the criminal. You have to find the motive for the crime. So I'm going to ask you to think with me as to what the genetic code's game is. Now, of course, this has always been a very impious thing to do. When man tries to figure out what God's game is, or when the human mind, which is a fragment of the nervous system, attempts to figure out what the genetic blueprint is up to. Because it's the genetic blueprint which designed and produced the brain and the mind that's trying to figure it out. So we're in a ridiculous position, but let's try it. Now, from the standpoint of the strategy of the genetic material, every living species is simply a creative solution to a packaging problem. Every single-celled organism, every lower form of life, every fish in the sea, every form of vegetation, every mammal, including man, is an original design, a packaging design to meet the particular environmental problems that that species faces in the air, under the earth, in the water, on land. Now, when you get to the more complicated forms of life like mammals, the packaging problem is really incredible, because the mammalian body, or the human body, is an enormously intricate machine to get this simple task done. Now, the genetic code, as I imagine it to operate, faces a very tricky problem here. And here's the problem. In order to keep the mammalian body going, you have to have a nervous system which coordinates and registers all the information that's going on inside this incredible machine and outside around us. The brain has to be aware of billions of events which occur from moment to moment. But the pilot of this mobile seed-carrying package, obviously can't be tuned in on all of this activity, because if you and I were aware of this kaleidoscope of events inside, we'd be so ecstatic, we'd be so engulfed, we'd be so amazed, we'd be so delighted that we'd simply stand still and never move in wonder and awe and ecstasy, and we wouldn't pilot our package through the jungles of New York to keep the genetic codes game going. So you see the strategy. Somehow there has to be a pilot stuck way, way, way up in a crow's nest who thinks he has a very important role in the whole operation, but actually down below there's this enormous ship, or this mobile factory moving along, which really pays no attention to what's going on in the crow's nest. The reason that the human mind is cut off from most of the brain's activity seems to have logical, strategic meaning to the problem that the genetic code faces. And this, I suggest, is the why of the great neurological robbery. Next, I want to discuss the how of the robbery. The way the genetic code solves this problem is through the process of imprinting. And this is the second great discovery of the last 15 years, which we're convinced may well change man's view of himself. Now, the research on imprinting has been done by scientists called ethologists. These are men who study animal behavior and animal learning in the very early hours of the organism's history. And they've come up with some remarkably interesting findings in the last few years. The first finding is that very early, in the first hours or the first days of almost every bird and mammal species, there's what's called a critical period. This is a period when the nervous system seems to be sensitive and vulnerable and open to registering certain environmental events and imprinting them. This critical period, which has been fairly well studied for many species, ends, and after the critical period, the process of imprinting can no longer take place. Now let me give you an example. In the case of most birds, let's take, for example, ducks. The baby duck usually imprints the first object that moves and makes noise. And any object which moves and makes noise during the critical period will then be followed And all of the instinctual machinery inside the duck's body will then be focused on this first imprinted object. Now, of course, in almost every case, the first moving object that makes noise that the baby duck experiences is the mother. And that's great because the baby duck imprints the adult of its species and then is hooked on the duck game. But if you remove the mother duck before the critical period, which I think in the case of ducks lasts, say, between the 12th and 20th hour of the baby's life, if you remove the mother and substitute any other object which moves and makes noise, the duck will imprint that. One of the most amusing and somewhat horrifying studies which have been done by ethologists is that baby ducks were presented during this critical period with a large, round, orange basketball, which led to the pathetic picture of the baby ducklings following the basketball as it was pulled or towed around the room. To test whether imprinting has taken place, you repeat the imprinting sequence after the critical period. In this case, the baby duck was put in a Y maze, and on the left-hand part of the Y maze was a nice, round, fluffy mother duck, and on the right arm of the Y maze was an orange basketball. The ducks who were imprinted on the basketball took one look at the mother duck and followed the orange basketball. This is both funny and tragic because it raises the question, in the case of the human being, what accidental orange basketballs have you and I been exposed to early in life? Now, there's one fascinating aspect of imprinting which is tremendously relevant to the psychedelic experience, and for that matter, to other interpretations of the psychedelic experience, like the religious, and that is that imprinting has to do with external objects. And the trick of the genetic code in setting up the strategy of imprinting was to get our attention on things out there, and on one particular thing out there. Then, of course, once you imprint something, once you imprinted your orange basketball, then the process of learning, which psychologists study, took over, conditioning, so that first there was the orange basketball, and then you found that the orange basketball had a bottle, and then you knew that every time you heard footsteps on the floor, the orange basketball was there with the bottle. And slowly, step by step, through conditioning, reinforcement learning, so forth, you built up the very complicated structure that you now have as a socialized human being. But the suggestion is that this all started, was based on an original imprinting experience, an irreversible biochemical process engraved on your nervous system. Now, the science of imprinting is getting quite complicated, and I'm always tempted to go into imprinting experiments because they have such tremendous relevance for the human situation. You see, if you keep the baby duck in a dark box during this critical period, after the 20th hour, if you take the box out, the baby duck will just wander around aimlessly and will open up its beak to be fed at any noise, will try to copulate it when it gets older with any moving object. It's helpless in a survival sense. There's some evidence from human beings, although there's been almost no scientific studies in imprinting, that little babies who have had no human object around during the early hours develop into what's called childhood schizophrenics. That is, they can never get any contact with a human being. And when human beings try to contact these little babies, it's just like the mother duck attempting to contact that little baby duck that is off following a basketball. A most eerie and disturbing experience to watch. Now, According to the ethologists, imprinting is a biochemical engraving of the nervous system which is irreversible. From the standpoint of the genetic code plays the game of statistics with us. It knows that in most cases we will imprint adults in our species, and then if we model ourselves and learn from that imprinted object, the chance that we'll grow up to be like our parents, who are successful enough from the standpoint of the genetic code that they had us, and so the game can keep going. But the most relevant point to our discussion tonight is that once this imprinting has taken place, the nervous system has been frozen. There's that snapshot of the duck, and you can be conditioned to relate other things to that orange basketball, but the general feeling is that imprinting is irreversible. Of course, there's one other disturbing thing about imprinting. I'm convinced that if you ask the baby duck, now come on, why is it that you chase that cold plastic basketball when you could chase that nice fluffy mother duck? The duck would probably have 31 good, logical, rational reasons why. You know, after all, orange is a nicer color, and there's no, it's cleaner. You can't get venereal disease, and keep the birth rate down. At times it seems to us that one of the functions of the mind is to rationalize and protect an accidental early imprint. Another interesting aspect of imprinting is that it can be affected, postponed, delayed, influenced by drugs. For example, reserpine can postpone the period of imprinting if baby ducks are kept, or baby birds are kept on reserpine. Then, long after the time when the critical period is over, imprinting can take place. This, of course, has implications for other drug approaches to this problem. I'm suggesting then that imprinting is the method that the genetic code uses to focus the attention of the pilot of this mobile seed-carrying package on certain aspects of the environment which statistically will teach it how to survive. But what this means is that the genetic code has preempted about 99.999% of your brain and my brain for its purposes, and has left us with this 0.00001% for us to play out our chessboard on. Aldous Huxley has a very interesting thing to say about that. He made the comment that he finds it amusing and altogether admirable that 99% of his brain didn't know that Aldous Huxley existed. Having suggested the why and the how of this neurological robbery, I want to move next to what we think is the new solution. Now, of course, imprinting is simply a term, it's a metaphor. What we ask of any metaphor or any theory in science is, first of all, how much of the data or how many different findings, how many different fields does it tie together? The imprinting metaphor is interesting because it ties together ethology, neurology, pharmacology, and we think psychology. The second thing you ask of any metaphor or any new theory is how practical is it? And as I hope to point out later, we think there are very practical implications of the imprinting theory for man's use of his head. We suggest that psychedelic drugs may be seen as chemical agents which temporarily suspend your old imprint. That is, we think that most of us go through life interpreting and experiencing everything in terms of some very tired old snapshots which were imposed upon us maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. And the job of our mind is to relate every new experience in life to some object or some person on that tired old snapshot. So that every new woman you meet is usually seen in terms of a chain of other women back to whatever woman was in your original imprint, if you were lucky to have a woman in it. Now, there are many reasons why we think that it's useful to conceive of the psychedelic drugs as suspenders of imprinting. And one of them has to do with this commitment, attachment of the imprinting process to the external. Because there's one thing that happens during an LSD session is that you tend to lose a lot of your attachment to external events. It's perfectly typical that during an LSD session the subject will lie for 5 or 6 hours completely silently, not moving around, and perhaps even with their eyes closed, which has led in the past some psychiatrists to say, aha, LSD causes catatonic stupors. But then when you ask the person what was going on during that 5 or 6 hours when you didn't move, were you in a stupor or a coma, and the person would say, coma? More was going on in any 1 second of that period than in any month of my life before. The point is, and this of course is the tricky point, that the commitment to the external orange basketball is temporarily lost, which can be an ecstatic liberation, or it can be a terrorizing paranoia, depending upon how much you understand about the possibilities of your mind. Now, there's another interesting line of evidence which kind of focuses in here, and this is the evidence from a line of study of psychologists the last few years, which is called sensory deprivation. The word sensory deprivation is an amusing one, because what psychologists mean by sensory deprivation, that word deprivation is a tricky one, is that if you put a person in a dark room where there's not any noise or any stimulation, and you keep him there for several hours, after this period of time, strange things begin to happen. He begins to have hallucinations. He begins to develop paranoias, or he begins having a wonderful time. Of course, most of these studies have been done with Air Force pilots or very outgoing Americans. And when they're separated from their orange basketball for more than 1 hour, when they're separated from their orange basketball for more than 1 hour, they begin to bang their heads against the wall. On the other hand, what sensory deprivation is, of course, is one of the oldest techniques of getting out of your mind to use your head, which has ever been known. The monastic cell, the monk in the desert, the yoga who turns off the external world, and so forth. So the same phenomena which to an American psychologist causes psychosis, to most of the rest of the world is seen as one of the royal roads to using your head. And there's an amusing story about Gerald Hurd, this 70-year-old British philosopher who was a tiny little man who went running around the country several years ago looking for a psychiatric research center where he could jump in one of these sensory deprivation vats and take LSD and use his head. Now, so far, the notions of imprinting and psychedelic drugs may be interesting, but the implications are not terribly dramatic. When I present this theory to psychiatrists, they would say, yes, that makes logical sense, but we could say the same thing in psychoanalytic terms, that you work the chain of associations back to the original traumatic event or the original primal scene, and then the task is, of course, to understand that and do something about it. The way the analysts do it is they try to get back to the original imprint And then, by having you fall in love with the analyst, you try to build up another imprint. This is not, I'm not saying that critically. I think that the Freudian theory, the psychoanalytic theory of free association to get back to the original event, and the transference neurosis to get out of that or get a new imprint is one of the most brilliant models ever developed by man, and I'm really breathless in admiration. And the more I understand about imprinting, the shrewder and the more creative I see that Freud was. He was a brilliant man. But the thing which excites us these days is the corollary concept of psychedelic re-imprinting. Now, this is a very complicated and promising notion. Our concept of the brain at present is that you and I have been presented at birth with this 13 billion cell camera with the possibilities of shooting motion pictures all the time. But because of the genetic code and imprinting, we've been frozen with one snapshot. We think that the psychedelic drugs can suspend the old snapshot, and anyone who's had LSD will perhaps empathize that I describe someone's experience as your neurological camera tumbling in a million different directions any half hour, shooting all sorts of film that you had never thought possible before, and then very slowly, over a period of 8 or 10 or 11, 12 hours, slowing down and eventually coming to rest maybe after 16 hours. But we think that you come to rest with a new snapshot. Now, there's nothing that I'm saying about imprinting or LSD or re-imprinting which is either positive or negative. I'm not here to sell LSD or to sell you on your brain. The more you think about the psychedelic experience in terms of neurological photography, you see that you can take beautiful pictures or you can take miserable pictures. You can take frightening pictures, you can take holy pictures, you can take any kind of pictures. So that the challenge for psychedelic research at this point is to learn how to use this incredible camera and to learn about lighting, what kind of objects you want to take pictures of, and so forth. Now, it's obvious, too, that you don't lose your old imprint, because after an LSD session, you come back and you still speak English and you know how to lace your shoes. As a matter of fact, that's one of the problems, that too often we go back too readily to the old orange basketball with all its correlated habits. And one of the paradoxes that intrigued us at the beginning of our research 4.5 years ago was, why is it that for 8 hours a person can be shooting up there in all sorts of cosmic revelations, great Buddha enlightenments, and then the next day we're back in the same old neurological straitjacket? Well, I think this is easily explained, that the original orange basketball that you and I imprinted, then through conditioning, built up around it hundreds of thousands or millions of associations, so that all our language, all of our rituals, all of our behaviors, and so forth are connected with the original imprint. Whereas if a man and his wife take LSD at sunset on their honeymoon, they take a wonderful new picture, but the problem and the challenge is that, of course, they don't stay in that situation, but tend to drift back to the old habits, because there are no new habits, or take a long time to build up habits around a new imprint. Now, everything that we have learned and thought about re-imprinting in relationship to psychedelic drugs has led us to increase the cautions that we make about LSD. it's a very tricky proposition. And before, when we thought that a psychedelic session just lasted 12 hours and gave you a new view, but then brought you back, we took chances in sessions that, by hindsight now, we think are quite reckless, because we think every time you have a psychedelic experience, there's a possibility of taking new pictures, which may be quite different from your old pictures. And you should be very careful with whom you take LSD and where you take LSD, and you should be very well prepared, because you're likely to come out of the session, of course, with a purple-colored football. Which may or may not cause problems when you go back to the office the next day, which is filled with orange basketballs. Now that the cautions have been presented, I feel it's possible to say something about the potentialities or the promises of this theory. If someone gave you a very valuable camera, how often would you use it? Or when would you use it? This, of course, is the question. How do you use your head? How often are you going to use your head? How often are you going to take LSD? We often use the concept of serial re-imprinting, and that one concept of man's existence, which might well take hold in the future, is that you have this neurological camera. You obviously should use it anytime you're changing your environment, anytime you're taking a new job, anytime you're moving into a new neighborhood, anytime you're changing your interpersonal network, anytime you have a new occupational task that you want to have engraved and not connected to your basketball by a series of associations. Anytime you have some important change in your life, you want to take a new snapshot. You don't want to take that old, tired picture from the 10 or 15 years past and apply it in a new situation. Of course, there's a paradox here, because the question, how often should you reprogram your nervous system? How often should you take LSD? It's your present robot snapshot identity which is deciding when it's going to change itself. And this accounts, I think, for the fear and the hesitation which almost all of us feel about a psychedelic drug session. I think that anyone who doesn't experience at some moment during their psychedelic session an intense, awe-full fear has been cheated by their psychiatrist or their bootlegger. One way of deciding how often to take LSD in this utopian world of the future is not to let your mind decide, because I'm suggesting that the genetic code wants our mind to be attached to externals and shuns the internal. Rather than letting your mind decide, why not let your body decide? And here's a fascinating aspect of the pharmacology of LSD. You can't take LSD every day. That is, you can't keep your neurological camera just going in this kaleidoscopic fashion for more than 12 or 15 or 20 hours. There's what's called a refractory period. That if you take LSD today, you have to wait 5, 6, 7, or 8 days before you can have another psychedelic effect. In other words, if you suspend your snapshot, it takes maybe 5 or 6 days to let the new snapshot kind of harden, and it's 5 or 6, 7 days before you're back in a new robot situation, and then the nervous system is ready for another reprogramming. So that it may well be, in the utopian world of the future, that LSD and similar foods and chemicals will be used just as vitamins are used today, and it's possible that every 7 days you'll take LSD and bring your picture up to date. Now, the time is running out for the radio program, and I'm going to rush to the conclusions. There are other things which can be taken up in the question period that I wanted to talk about. The conclusions that we've come to after 4.5 years of psychedelic research is that we know almost nothing about our own heads or how to use them. And anyone who tells you he knows much about LSD, of course he's really talking about the potentialities of his brain, should be listened to with great caution, because the human species at this time is a very primitive species which has just got this cortex only 40,000 years ago, and we're just now catching on to the possibility that we can use it. And so it's going to take several thousand years, I think, before we'll have any clue as to how really to use this incredible machine. But conclusion number one is, thank you. Are you a pessimist or an optimist? Conclusion number one is that the members of our research group have lost a lot of our zeal to proselytize about the human brain, or to run large research projects, or to get involved in any external politics which would attempt to raise money for research grants, or to get LSD accepted by the FDA and so forth. Your main job and my main job is to save your own head, and to to learn how to use your head and learn how to use my head, or to use the religious metaphor. The real task is to save your own soul, and for me to save my own soul. Because the trap is always to get caught in external programs, movements, publications, research grants, and so forth. The problem is always inside. And of course, this is the oldest message that man has ever told himself. There's a second conclusion, and that is that there seems to be a duty to report back for those who have been engaged in internal explorations. It's only fair, since we're all in the dark anyway, to share any landmarks or any points of interest that can be used for other travelers. And of course, that's what's been happening for centuries. And in our psychedelic research, we have relied on many maps drawn by men who made these voyages thousands of years ago. This book, The Psychedelic Experience, is based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is an eminently practical LSD guide, although it's 2,500 years old. The third conclusion is that as you detach yourself from so complete an investment in external gains, you come to appreciate your own body more, and the natural process more. I should clarify that we talk so much about the brain that once someone listening to us said that the more we talked about the brain, she got the picture of my forehead getting higher and higher and my cranium swelling, so that pretty soon it was this tiny little tendril of a body with this huge computer 13 billion cell camera on top. This is quite the opposite of what we mean. That those who have worked with psychedelic drugs know that you become more and more aware of the infinity of possibilities within your own body, and less obsessively concerned with some externals, which seem irrelevant. Another conclusion is, I think it's suggested by my early remarks, there's less and less interest in broad mass public activity and much more commitment to primary groups, family groups, close small groups of friends. although the histories would have us think that all the important events in man's life are elections and wars and this sort of thing. You know and I know that all the meaningful things in our life take place in private and with either one other person or a very small group of people. It's always been that way. It's always been that way, and there's never going to be a large, federally supported research grant on psychedelics, which is going to learn to teach you how to use your head or help me solve my spiritual problems. Let's not kid ourselves. Another conclusion is that, and here I can't generalize, I'm talking about the 30 or 40 people with whom I've been associated in this work. There's a much deeper appreciation for one of the oldest and most basic of human enterprises, and that is the male-female relationship. LSD is the most powerful aphrodisiac ever known to man. Now, it's interesting, some clapped and some didn't. Let me explain what an aphrodisiac is. Aphrodisiac comes from the Greek word for the goddess of love. An aphrodisiac is an agent which promotes love. And by aphrodisiac, I don't mean faster and more motions of robot bodies in bedrooms. I'm, of course, talking about the communication which can exist between people whose neurological cameras are accelerated and much wider and more open. In the future utopian society I've been talking about, a wife may be a little bit worried if her husband has an illicit sexual affair, but real grounds for divorce will be if he takes LSD with another woman. So here, the mystery comes full circle, because the paradox is that the more you use your head, the more in tune we think you get with the original purpose and design and goal of the genetic code. Because if there's anything the genetic code seems to want, it's to keep itself going. To keep the great game of life going. For your presence tonight and for your attention, I thank you.
Yeah, and there he was, Timothy Leary. What an incredible lecture from 1964. It was really foundational because he was talking to these people. It was all new for those guys. 1964, the Summer of Love hadn't even happened yet. That was 67. So the whole LSD revolution was really just taking off. I mean, my God, the Grateful Dead, they weren't even around until 1965. So putting everything into perspective, that was a very early lecture in psychedelia by the master, the one and only Timothy Leary. What did you think about that, Brynn? You took a lot of notes this time.
I always take a lot of notes.
I know these have been really fruitful, I think, lectures that we listened to. But tell me what you thought. What do you think?
Well, one is I was just trying to picture his audience, just thinking about in 1964, like who was gathering in the auditorium to listen to Timothy Leary.
I think half the people were on psychedelics because of the way they were laughing.
They did have that laugh.
And then when like one person clapped or something, like it made everybody laugh, and
everybody clapped.
They laughed like a flock of birds.
Right. And the other thing I want to know is where are my once every 7 day LSD vitamins? Because I haven't.
It's coming in a utopian society.
Oh, okay, that's when it's coming. Got it. So.
Well, what else? Let's hear some of your other things.
I just like to write along with when we're listening because it.
Well, the imprinting thing was really cool.
The imprinting was very cool, and
it makes you think about how you come into this world, what you choose to use as your foundation when you interface with three-dimensional reality. Like, where did the root of your choices come from? Who programmed the algorithm? Because part of it was you reacting to your environment and just like observation, but there was another part of it that came externally. It came from your parents or your guardians or from just people around you. And it's really interesting to see that they found drugs that can suspend that imprint in a way like LSD can for ducks anyway. I think it was called like Recipine or something like that.
Yeah, I wrote that down. That was.
But there's this ability for psychedelic drugs to reprogram your imprinting and to do it in a way that you choose versus a way that was
just, yeah.
By birth, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Or just imposed upon you when you were just unconsciously, or by matter of whatever your routine is during the day and the things you pick up that you're just unconsciously doing. One thing that I thought about when he was talking about the imprinting and the duck is that's something that's a very common theme in children's stories. It's like the duck that got imprinted on the dog, or the, little chick that was imprinted on the elephant and ran around calling the elephant mommy for the whole rest of the children's story.
Right.
But we, laugh about that with kids when we're reading it to them, but seldom do we think about the human imprinting and how we are all imprinted like that. And like he said, you could be imprinted on all kinds of plastic orange basketballs and not even realize it. And you would defend, just like the little duck would defend all the reasons why the basketball was better than the fluffy duck mom. And that brings a whole other can of worms about how we can defend and be so certain about our position on something and not really even know the source or where it came from. That's
the programming
profound.
The programming is so ingrained. It's so deeply rooted that you don't even realize that you were programmed because it happens so early on. And if you knew how you were programmed, you might not choose to be programmed in that way.
And you might, not choose to defend it either. It's really interesting. And then, at the very end, I thought it was also really interesting how he was talking about, the external versus internal, and how when we're making change within, that seldom happens at a big group level, that it's more about each person going within and changing our programming within and all the different things that happen at that source level, rather than a mass group. Although there's something to be said for, like a Grateful Dead concert, or sort of that mass consciousness when everyone is reprogramming themselves in one situation, even though everyone's experience is individual.
Yeah, and I think it's cool that he talked about the group that we are all a part of. It's the people that they have a suspicion.
I like that club. I'm in that club for sure.
There's a lot more than we were led to believe. So let's go into the next part of our episode. This is from 1992. This is like a public access TV show called Skip Lowe Looks at Hollywood. It was public access, 1992. Skip Lowe passed. Timothy Leary passed. This is a very strange and rare interview. So here we go. This is actually at the tail end of Timothy Leary's life. He passed away in 1996. So here we go. Action.
Timothy Leary grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. Is that where you grew up?
I spent my first 18 years in a very small town in western Massachusetts.
College? Where?
I went to about 7 colleges. Actually, I was expelled from several of them. I went to West Point for 2 years. I went to a Jesuit school. I got my master's degree from Washington State University in Pullman.
Right.
And then my doctorate in psychology at UC Berkeley.
Berkeley. Expelled from where? You say several. Expelled for what reason, may I ask?
Well, I was expelled from the University of Alabama for spending the night in the girls' dormitory. Now, you're going to ruin my reputation.
No, go ahead, Timothy. I want to know. No.
You're going to go for the real inside
No, you say
story.
expelled. Go ahead, like you several. But what expelled? What else? For what other reasons? You said one for girls.
I was expelled from a Jesuit school called Holy Cross College for gambling, playing poker, blackjack late at night during a religious retreat with a son of an Italian mafia guy from New York. That got me. They graduated me right there.
You've been outspoken ever since you were a kid, then, really. Timothy Leary's always been his own person, own mind, own spoken person.
Yes, I lived a very well, I would say a lonely childhood. It was a very isolated little town, and I didn't see much of the sophisticated world, so I lived as a child an extraordinary life. I read books all the time, and I dreamed dreams of doing heroic things to help the human race, and my model, my idol, was a philosopher named Socrates, and I based my entire life on Socrates.
So that's where Timothy Leary...
He's the guy that caused all the trouble for me. His motto was, he said that the aim of human life, Kippy, was to know thyself. Now this was very subversive, because the very idea of someone saying, you don't have a self, you're a serf, you're a slave, he was inventing the idea of individuality, and that you could do something about your life. Now as soon as I studied the books about Socrates, I realized that this is a dangerous profession, because you're teaching people to question authority. I realized that this job, which I was going to undertake, the corrupting of the minds of youth, it paid poorly. It could get you in serious difficulty with the authorities, and in the case of Socrates, it got him hemlocked. But I've enjoyed this profession, and in the last 70 years in America, it's been a wonderful time.
It has?
For a dissident philosopher, because so much change has happened that
Do you think the kids today know thyself? There's a lot of them don't have identifications of their own self. They don't know who they are. They just follow the leaders.
Ain't it the truth? It's been that way.
Am I right?
It's been that way for most human beings throughout most human history.
Right.
At certain times in human history, culture, when everything's favorable, you know what's called a renaissance. Now they had one in Athens, because Athens was protected by geography from the big empires.
Right.
There's another great renaissance in around Venice and in northern Italy, and a renaissance preaches the basic religion of humanism.
Right.
Renaissance period, we had one in the 60s here, and the key to it was humanism. He said, the aim of individual life is to know yourself and to treat each other as human beings. And this flies in direct opposition to every fundamentalist religion, to every political party where you're supposed to work for God or for the state. So, and what happens in a Renaissance, we rediscover the wonderful potential of the inner human being.
Right.
It becomes the clothes tend to come off because there's more human contact, and beauty and erotic activity tends to be more active at this period. So in the 60s we had a classic Renaissance, which ended in 1980 when the repression of Reagan and Bush came out. We all know that's my history.
Right. Berkeley. Went to Berkeley.
I went there for 4 years, and I taught.
And you taught?
For about 4 years at Berkeley, yeah.
Philosophy?
Psychology.
But that's really philosophy, too, isn't it, really?
Yes,
Psychology, philosophy.
Yeah,
you know,
of course,
to be a good psychiatrist, or, you know, go ahead.
I agree with you. Skippy.
So what do you think? You were there in the 60s, or was it the 60s you were there? When were you there?
No, I was a graduate student at Berkeley from 1940s.
40s? Really?
To 50.
Okay.
And I taught around Berkeley and did research there as a faculty member and a researcher for about 9 years. I left Berkeley basically to go to Harvard in 1959.
You went to Harvard for how long?
As a teacher. As a faculty member.
When did this all begin for Timothy Leary, this creating of LSD? When did all of that started?
Well, I didn't create LSD.
Well, you did something about it. They all think you are the creator, but you're not. I know you're not. An experiment.
I don't know anything about chemistry at all.
But
I'm now involved in computers, and I can hardly turn my own computer on. I try to use these tools as ways of increasing intelligence and getting to operate your mind and your brain. To be intelligent, to know thyself, you have to learn how to operate your mind and your brain. And
we don't use it enough. People use it just this much.
Yeah.
And there's a lot there. Tell me more about that.
Well, of course, most schools do not teach young people to think for themselves. The idea is most schools indoctrinate to train you to play your part in a factory society, or you're going to be a lawyer and you'll be a doctor, and you got to be a crook, because the cops, we have to have cops and crooks. So there are all these roles that are being taught in schools. But rarely, there are a lot of good teachers out there, and I'm sure...
are there really, Timothy?
There are many teachers out there, particularly now, people that went through the 60s when thinking for yourself was popular and almost authorized.
Yes.
There are a lot of good teachers out there that are doing their best to encourage and stimulate their students to think for themselves. But there's 60s kids that are now...
That's what I have always thought for myself ever since I was a kid.
That's why I like
I'm an
you.
individual. I'm me.
There ain't nobody like Skippy Love.
No, but I'm just saying, Timothy, I've always been me.
That's why I've always liked you, Skippy.
Did you? Is that right? So tell me more about the LSD. What happened there? You started something there with that creation. A lot of pot and everything else.
I didn't start anything. The use of certain botanical, vegetable substances was psychotropic to activate the brain. That's been going on for thousands of years.
It has been.
Socrates and that whole group of Plato and the Eleusinian mysteries, they were using marijuana, hashish, and opium. The use of drugs or vegetables to activate your brain, to open up new circuits of your brain, that's called shamanism. And many say that most of the religions and much of the philosophy has come from groups. Like the group around Socrates.
Socrates, yes.
At Harvard University, for example, there's been a long tradition, honorable tradition,
really, of
the use of psychedelic drugs.
At Harvard?
Ralph Waldo Emerson started what was called American Transcendentalism, flying in the face of the Puritan ethic in Boston. Emerson was banned from Harvard and Boston for about 30 years, longer than I was.
Really?
Yeah, and then at the same time, there was an active use of psychoactive drugs by British poets. Then William James, who founded the psychology department at Harvard, wrote a book called The Varieties of Religious Experience, in which he talked about his experiences with hashish and nitrous oxide.
Right.
So when I went there, I was joining a long club of honorable and very distinguished philosophers who believed in transcendence, or basically they were humanists, as opposed to the engineer tradition of MIT or the puritanical fundamentalist tradition of Christianity.
Right. But in 1970, 5 years, they gave you 5 years prison for a little abuse of marijuana.
I didn't.
Is it just for little marijuana? 5 years. Well, they said you for
more than 5.
It was?
I was sentenced to both federal and state prison for. Could have totaled 30 years.
30, but you didn't spend 30 years.
Well, I escaped after 9 months.
You did?
You didn't know that? Yeah.
No, I didn't know. What do you mean you escaped?
I trained very carefully, and I climbed a wire and climbed a wall, and I was met by a guerrilla outlaw group, and I got political asylum in Algeria, and...
How long were you in Algeria?
About 9 months. I was there with the Black Panthers, and then I went to...
With the Black Panthers?
You haven't read my book, have you?
Not really, no, I haven't. Not your book.
I've written several unauthorized autobiographies.
Right. I'm not too familiar with your book.
Yeah, so I got one called Flashbacks. You can get it in the bookstores right now. It's got the whole sordid story there, and that's being made into a movie now by Interscope. A brilliant young man named Bima Stagg, who's writing a script about my life.
So tell me more about being with the Black Panther in Algeria, and then from there you went to, you went back to prison? Did you go back to prison?
I had to escape from, actually, Algeria, because Algeria was a socialist, fundamentalist Islamic country, and that's no barrel of laughs.
No, I know it is.
Communism and Islamic fundamentalism.
Right.
I literally had to escape. I spent some time in Switzerland, and then I was captured by the DEA.
Where, in Switzerland?
No, in Afghanistan, at the airport, and brought back, and I did about 3.5. Altogether, I did 4.5 years in prison for the possession of 2 roaches of marijuana.
4.5 years? So it really turned your life around, didn't it? From a professor in Harvard and running, escaping. What did you do the 4.5 years in prison? Timothy Leary, what did Timothy Leary actually thought about? What did you do?
Well, I tell you, I used that time wisely. I enjoyed it. Now, I'm not advocating...
Did you enjoy it?
I'm not advocating prison, boys and girls, but I found it interesting and an educational experience for me to be a psychologist at the very bottom of the prison system, because after I escaped, they were really angry at me, and they put me at the bottom, and I got a view of society. You know, when you get down to the bottom, you really see how the police state operates. Also, I love being in prison because I didn't have to pay the rent. I didn't have to answer the telephone. I didn't have to produce erections, on a regular basis. It's just a joke.
Right, I know.
And when I was in solitary confinement, I liked that best because, you know why?
Why?
My roommate was a very funny guy, kept me entertained all the time.
Was he?
Yeah.
Is he still there, or is he out now?
That's me, my mirror.
Your roommate.
Yeah,
Oh, you.
yeah,
I
yeah.
see your mirror. Okay,
That's the
your
joke.
mirror. I
That's the
know the
joke.
mirror. You're a funny man. You know that?
Thank you.
You're actually doing a stand-up comedy too, kind of
No,
a
I don't
thing.
do stand-up.
Well,
I give my college lecture, but I give it
in
it's funny.
comedy, and comedy flair.
No,
No?
I make fun of authority. I make fun of. I'm very
Well,
irreverent.
that's comedy. That's fun.
Yes, but I'm not a stand-up. In the
No,
sense
I
that
meant,
I
you know.
don't tell dick jokes, you know. And I
No,
don't
no,
tell,
no, we
Should I
understand
say,
that.
Can I say dick on this program?
Yes, of course
All
you
right.
can. But
No, I
Timothy,
don't-
I understand that.
Yeah, I don't do that kind of stand-up. I try to mercilessly make fun of Christianity and Islam and politicians. That's just part of my job as a dissonant philosopher.
What happened after you got out of prison, the day you arrived out of prison? First of all, what prison were you in? At which one?
I was in 49 jails and prisons in four continents, so they moved me
Really?
around a lot, yeah.
They really
I came
moved you
after
around.
my release. I was released from California when Jerry Brown became governor, and I was released from federal prison after Reagan was thrown out.
Right.
I'm sorry, Nixon, 1976. And when I came to Hollywood, and I've been involved in communication and computers and electronics and...
Immediately, is this what ran through your mind in jail when you were preparing for this? When you got out, the computers?
Yes, I'm a great follower of a man named Marshall McLuhan, who wrote those wonderful books about communication. And he said that if you want to change a culture, if you want to change yourself, if you want to change religion, change the medium, the mode of communication. And he said that Gutenberg created Protestantism when he had the mass assemble book that everybody could read. And now the new form of communication is electronic. So I'm a fanatic about electronics. My brain...
Electronic brain you're into. Aren't you in electronic brains experiments right now you're into?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, maybe we should... I don't give lectures anymore, and
okay.
The next
you don't?
The next two Monday nights at EZTV.
EZT on Santa Monica Boulevard.
Santa Monica Boulevard, right?
I know it.
La
Yes,
Cienega.
off of La Cienega, right.
And it's in Santa Monica Boulevard between La Cienega and San Vicente.
That's in West Hollywood.
We're having a wonderful time because we're each Monday night we invite geniuses, wizards in this new field of electronic multimedia. And we're learning how to produce trance states by using computer-generated images and electronic patterns. Matter of fact, why don't we put on this little tape now to show you?
You have a tape right now.
And this is a commercial, like a commercial you see on TV, and we're at the message from the product.
Right.
The message from the sponsor is, learn how to use your eyeballs and operate your brain. So let's run the tape.
Use your eyeballs and...
Yeah, learn how to use your eyeballs. Yeah.
Interesting. Let's see it. Okay.
I guess you guys can't see this,
about?
but
See,
there's
the eye, that's going to...
eyes flashing.
In a dark room, this could... Indeed, when we do it in a dark room at EZTV, it produces a mild trance state. And then my voice comes over it, and I'm saying, the eyes are the windows of your brain. Who controls your eyes, controls and programs your brain.
Right.
And all eyes love to be illuminated. Eyes love dazzle. Eyes love diamonds, glitter. Eyes today and brains love electrons. Who controls your screen, controls your brain. We're developing methods for the individual, the kid in the third world, or the kid in the inner city school, learns how to control what's on her screen. Operate your brain. Program your own brain. Use the methods of modern advertising, trailers and commercials to put your own message on your brain. Otherwise, you'll be programmed by the wizards who control commercials on your television set.
Is this relaxing people see this?
Well, we're trying to jumble you and scramble your brain. See, basically, my brain, most brains love to be jumbled with electrons.
Do they really?
Oh, sure. It's been known.
Stimulate them? Is that stimulation?
There's been a rumor for centuries that some guy, tough male macho, dazzle the diamond in some young girl's eyes,
Right.
she'll wash his socks forever because diamonds are a girl's best friend.
Absolutely.
Wrong. Diamonds give power to those people who know how to use them. And now electrons. So we're teaching people, we're developing new computer programs, running off CD-ROM, running off Nintendos.
Where did you get this idea from?
It's all out there. It's all out
It is
there.
out
yeah.
there?
Yeah.
But
These are not my ideas.
What sort of persons attract to Timothy Leary? What sort of person attracts to intelligent people, I know. People with
Yeah.
minds and they want to be their own persons. But what sort of person?
Well, people, I can tell you people who do not like me are those people who are deeply committed to a religious orthodoxy or to a fundamentalist cause.
Right.
Open-minded people like me. People
Open-minded.
that, troublemakers, bohemians, artists.
Would you consider yourself a bohemian?
Well, it's one phrase. I'm
Well-
a hippie, I'm a beatnik, I'm a bohemian. I'm
Well,
basically an outsider. I'm a dissenting philosopher, and there's always a good market for a good audience because basically a lot of people out there want to be turned on and want to learn how to operate their brains.
Has been the biggest lesson for Timothy Leary in your life?
Well, it's kind of foolish to be, I don't pretend to be a wise person. I
understand that.
I raise questions. I don't give answers. That's what Socrates told me.
Right.
But I will give you an answer here. We're playing the ping pong game of an interview.
Right.
Let me see. The best tip I could give anyone, if you want to grow and learn how to become smarter, enjoy life more, and remain young, hang out with people that are smarter than you are, and they can teach you something about your mind and your brain. And I'm proud to say that I hang out, my friends, every week. When I look at my calendar, my appointment book, and I see the people that I hang out with.
Who sort of some of the people? Come on.
Well, Sunday, for example, at my house in Beverly Hills, I had a turkey roast. I didn't do anything about the turkey. For 70 members of Alcor. Alcor is an organization who believe people that are going to have their bodies or their brains frozen. You heard about
Of course.
I'm a member of...
I might be one of them. Go ahead.
We had 65 or 70 people in my home. We plan to meet each other maybe in 20 or 30 or 40 years because we're going to be brought back by...
Is that the tag?
Yeah, that's the tag. That tells doctors, do not autopsy me, freeze me.
Really?
It says freeze the occupant. To give you an example, now these people, these 60 people, by definition, they think for themselves, right?
Right.
I
like that.
They're mavericks,
Yeah.
and they're smart because you got to be smart. You have to understand the physics and the biology and the memory. So they're smart people. Monday nights every Monday night I go to Easy TV, and we're assembling at Easy TV.
What do you mean by assembly? You gather people around?
People
and
come in, they buy a ticket,
pay.
and they come in. But we're
And you talk to them
assembling
and all
crew.
that? Yeah.
For example, there's a play called Timothy and Charlie. It's about me and Charlie Manson. It was written by Tim Reel, and they do incredible audio visuals. So they perform. What we're doing, Skippy, is we're merging at Easy TV every Monday night.
Right.
The power of electrons to create an environment, and then out of the environment, the lecturer comes, or the actors in the play suddenly jump out of the screen-like environment. We're developing experiments in what's called virtual reality.
Right.
And these young people, I'm the luckiest, really, the man in the world. Every week I meet new people that are on that frontier of electronic communication and consciousness expansion and intelligence increase.
What's been the hardest for Timothy Leary? What's been the hardest for you?
Well, I suffer, as we all do, about the incredible poverty and hunger and violence and military power. I mean, just when you read now, the Hindus are fighting the Muslims and the Catholics are fighting the Protestants in Belfast. The stupidity and the ignorance and the control of the military and the religious people, that pains me very much, and as I think it does most of us out there.
You're very concerned, aren't you, Timothy? You've been concerned. I'm looking at you right now. You're very concerned what's out there. But are we doing the right thing right now with our military forces?
Who's we?
Well, the military forces
keep me
going
out of
to,
that,
you don't want to be in that. Okay, military forces, the Americas. Are we doing the right thing to I know we should help them. It's a terrible thing.
See, I'm not an expert on that, but basically I think I don't like the idea of having military people doing that because it's
Right.
glorifying
Absolutely.
military.
Absolutely.
And anything that glorifies the military, you're going to pay for that.
Right.
You're going to pay for that in your budget. You're going to pay for that in bloodshed. So I've been to West Point. Skippy, I was actually born at
Were
West
you
Point.
in really
My
West
father
Point?
was an Army officer. I was born at West Point.
Is that one of the schools you got kicked out of?
And I got kicked out of. No, I actually resigned from
You
West
resigned?
Point. I know the military mind very well, and the military mind is not to be trusted.
I do too. I used to entertain 10, 15 years of my life all over the world.
Yeah.
Vietnam and everything.
Mhm.
And I know the military.
Yeah.
And I don't agree us military being there.
Hardliners, the hardliners
They
in
are.
America, and the hardliners in Russia, and the hardliners in Somalia, they all want to
Uh-huh.
take our wealth and use it on weapons. So
Some of your books. Tell me some of your books. And I have not read. I got to be honest with you. How many books have you got out?
it's about 30, 35.
35?
Yeah.
Really? What's the most popular of Timothy Leary?
Flashbacks.
The Mirror? Flashback?
Flashbacks.
How about The Mirror? The Mirror.
Mind Mirror was a computer game.
Tell me about the Mind Mirror.
Well, I've been working for the last 10 years on programs that allow the person to turn the computer screen into like a mind phone.
Right.
And to put your thoughts there. 5 or 6 years ago, you could only do this with words, alphanumerics, but now you can use CD-ROM and graphics. So these new image processors and computers are tools
Right.
to learn how to operate your brain and how to communicate more clearly and become smarter.
Timothy Leary, married? You have, you have children?
At the present time, I've been married 7.5 times.
7.5
7
times.
3/4
You
times. I have an addiction problem, Skippy. I'm addicted to marriage.
started to
I'm
women.
addicted to marriage. I just
Are you
love
really?
being married.
Okay, you
Like
and
any-
Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney did too.
Yeah, and the first 2 or 3, 4 years it's wonderful, but then you realize that you're dependent on it, and that and then I have. I'm proud to say that I have been lucky enough to have as my living companions some of the smartest, most beautiful women in the world, and every good thing that has come from me I owe to my
Barbara. Her name is Barbara?
Barbara.
Yeah, I met her in Rome years ago. She used to live in Rome.
She was an actress and a model there, yeah.
She was.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
I
right,
didn't know
yeah.
that at the time, but beautiful lady, very
And
bright.
very intelligent, yeah, and elegant.
You like to be around intelligent, brilliant people. Do you ever be around dumb people sometimes, Timothy? Don't look at me now. Have you ever been around people?
Well,
How
all
do you
around,
handle that? How do
yes. I try to leave a trail of fun and joy. Yeah, we all, as we go through life, you meet a lot of people
Right.
that are not necessarily brain surgeons, but I try in any interaction to leave a little trail of sunshine or, a little joke or something, because I basically believe in humanity.
Yes.
I believe in the human potential, and my life is about awakening or encouraging people to develop their potential. And it's a
Do you
wonderful
write all
profession.
night, Timothy, at night? It
I
seems
tend to be
like
a
you're a
late,
writer.
I'm a late night person.
Yeah, it seems like it to me. Because I think you read a lot. You read a
Less
lot.
and less.
Everything?
I don't read books as much anymore. I read magazines, and I do a lot of computer stuff.
Is that important for us to know what's out there in the world today? Or sometimes it confuses me when I turn the TV on and listen to the news. It's upsetting.
Yeah, it's sad.
Sad. I can't sleep at night sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I don't want to listen to the news late night.
Mm-hmm.
How do we handle that? How do we handle that?
Well, see, when people ask me questions like that, my answer is think for yourself.
Okay.
Figure it out yourself. Think for yourself, because
I
each
don't want to
person
listen
is
to
different.
it. Oh, I see. I see.
And you have to experiment with yourself and listen to other people's ideas, but you have to do it yourself.
I see.
Think for yourself.
Timothy Leary, what makes Timothy Leary happy? What does he? Are you a happy person?
I think I'm one of the happiest people who've ever lived.
Really?
Yes.
Even throughout this whole... Do you have any regrets in your life right now, Timothy?
Yes, that's a logical question. I regret the fact that I moved around so much, and being in prison and being so controversial. It was very hard on my children, and it was very hard on one of my marriages, because at one point Richard Nixon called me the most dangerous man in America, and I was being stopped and chased by the police everywhere I went they were just... Well,
Right.
my basic crime was I was abusing the First Amendment by by talking too much.
I know. I understand.
But
They
it
don't
was very
like us to think for ourselves.
Yeah,
When they start,
and,
we think for ourselves, we're dangerous.
It was very hard to answer your question on my children, to have their father, such a hated person. My son, when he went to high school, was actually beat up by other kids because he was my son.
Yes.
And this takes a tremendous, of course, still I'm a middle-class American, so it's not as bad as it is for most children in the world, but still I regret that my kind of life was hard on the people that were closest to me, and because family and friendship are the basic things.
How is he handling it today, your son?
They're doing fine. They're doing fine.
They're going to school?
I've got 5 grandchildren, and I'm in touch with them all the time, and they go up and down. And there's not as much enmity. As a matter of fact, people are not, the government isn't going around, chasing me now, I hope.
Yeah.
But things are,
Is Timothy Leary...
It's going to be a great 1990s. I'll tell you a little story that was told to me. It's a time to rejoice because when you think about it, there are a lot of bad things happening, but we have a president,
right,
a vice president, and 2 dynamic, strong first ladies, all of whom are younger than old farts like Bob Dylan and Mick Jagger. Isn't that something? It's a whole new young generation.
Isn't it great?
Which is post-World War II, and it's the 60s kids. And
so you like that?
I don't, I'm not claiming that Clinton's going to be a great politician because it's a hopeless job, but the spirit of hope that Clinton and Bush, and there is all around the world, there's
you
a sense
that.
of,
I do too.
Kennedy, for example, when Kennedy was elected in the 60s, he gave us hope too. Actually, Kennedy was not a very good president.
Yes.
But still, the fact he was young and jacky, and it gave us a sense of hope and vigor and courage. And
he might bring Dylan to the White House to play for him. Dylan? I like Dylan. Don't you like Dylan? Bob Dylan. Dylan.
Jimmy Carter did that. The rumor is that they might bring the Grateful Dead. No, they're not going to bring Dylan, I don't think.
No. Tell me about Timothy Leary's book and life story and movies. What's going to happen? Are they going to be doing that of Timothy Leary?
I don't know.
Who would you like to see do your life story,
that's
Timothy?
That's almost like a matter. I don't think about that. I'd like Grace Jones to play me. How about Grace Jones?
And we're out. That
Hold
was
on, let me just laugh for a second.
Wild interview. That guy, Skip Lowe, holy cow. His interviewing skills and word pronunciations were skewed at times. He was a little all over the place, but really fun interview towards the end of Timothy Leary's life, talking about his life. It was cool to cap off the early interview and then to have him tell us personally about his life in an encapsulated way. It was really cool. He talked about a lot of things that were current at the time, the computer revolution, the technological things that were happening. The video that he produced was pretty amazing. 1990s, early 90s, very basic electronic music, I guess, which was very advanced at the time. I can't knock it, but also the graphics were very dated, the eyes. Supposedly it was supposed to induce a trance. I don't know, but I appreciate that he did the interview. It was very humorous. What did you think, Brynn? How about Skip Lowe?
Oh, Skip Lowe is he your new interview teacher?
He unfortunately has passed away.
Oh, right. You said that at the beginning. I'm sorry.
Yes, no, it's okay.
Yes, he has passed away.
He's on to the next dimension.
I want to know, so is Timothy Leary frozen?
I think they froze his head. I don't know if that actually happened. Maybe it did. I'm pretty sure his head's frozen.
His head? Just his head?
Just his head, yeah.
Okay.
It's out there somewhere.
It's out there somewhere. Also, I was thinking about what if Timothy Leary was your psychology teacher? Thinking back at Harvard in 1950,
he was just like,
that would be really interesting.
He was just like the super cool guy back then. He wasn't psychedelically activated at that point in his life.
Right.
It wasn't until he was actually at the age of 40 before he really figured out the whole LSD experience. I've read a lot of his books. High Priest, I really recommend that book. He's got a lot of great stories about his life in that. But yeah, it would have been cool because he was just like this cool guy.
Yeah, he would have been a teacher that
great
made an
teacher,
impact,
a fun
for
teacher,
sure. Yeah.
A fun teacher. Just like he taught us right now. We're listening to these lectures. we're listening to these lectures to learn from them and to gain something from Timothy Leary, who's not here, and even Skip Lowe, that funny, strange guy.
Yeah, and just it's funny to hear him, it was all Socrates' fault, and kind of think of him as a kid, like what his initial inspiration was that made him follow his golden thread.
It's
through
funny
life.
because he also got the same charge as Socrates, which was corrupting the youth. He actually got charged with that, just like Socrates
That's
did.
so interesting.
He manifested that in his life. He's a
he-
very powerful guy, Timothy Leary.
Yeah. Maybe he was a reincarnation of Socrates. Who knows?
I don't know.
It was interesting to see his, like we were talking about the computer stuff, that was so current and new, and like, you can put this on a CD-ROM. It's, this revolutionary thing. It would be interesting to see Timothy Leary, if he could take a peek at today's technology and social media and all of,
The instant interaction.
just the instant interaction. He was saying, like, you should put your ideas on the screen, and kind of, wow, just the exponential
Yeah, it really
happenings in the computer world.
It really seemed to correlate well with the earlier lecture. And it was funny, he said even in that later interview that he didn't do lectures anymore. So it's kind of interesting how they kind of referenced each other. Well, I'm really glad you joined us. Brynn, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, yeah, of course. That was super fun.
Yeah, it's good to tap into these people who have left this earth and they're still giving to us just a little bit more. We're having one little last hangout before the interviews kick back in. We'll have some interviews next week. You're going to love what we have coming up. Midnight on Earth.